Hello everyone, this is G and I'm back with another video. I hope everybody's having a good Friday. So what I wanted to discuss today is another fairly serious topic, especially with everything going on in the world, so it's big current affairs. But I wanted to discuss honor, right? What honor is and what type of person is deserving of honor, especially public honor, like public recognition, public honor, right? Things of that sort, because we're so concerned in today's world, especially in America, with how uh, a person, in particular a black person, right, when they encounter the police, right, how a black person uh, is restrained, or in some cases, such as George Floyd or Breonna Taylor or Antoine Rose or others, right, how they die, right? And I don't think there's anything wrong in and of itself with being concerned or even critical of how people in police custody die. I do think that is something that needs to be examined for the good of all, for the good of the police, for the good of the criminals that they apprehend, for the good of the public at large, right? Because ideally, when the police arrest a criminal, even a violent one, they're supposed to try to bring the person in, right, unharmed and alive. So when someone gets harmed or someone dies in their custody, right, something obviously went wrong in the situation, right? And I do think that it is fair, that it is a good thing to look into these matters objectively as much as one can, to try to see where things got out of control, if only just to protect yourself, right, or to put or to protect the police department from, like, scrutiny or things of that nature, right? So there will always be debate, which is not necessarily bad in of itself, but there will always be debate over how George Floyd was, how he was restrained, which I would say was a contributing factor to his death. Now, to be fair, I did look at the medical report just before making this video, and George Floyd wasn't long for this world, even without that officer sitting on his back the way he did. But at the same time, in my opinion, that officer shouldn't have done that. It just contributed to his death, and now his death is your responsibility. It's again, that I think was a contributing factor. Let's just say. But that's another story for a different video. My point is that we get so wrapped up in how these people died, or in the case of Jacob Blake, in how he was injured, right, being shot in the back, that we don't that we don't give attention, at least in the media, we don't give attention to how these people live. And you'll have people in the media, like football players, like, media in general, like football players, basketball players. They'll put these people's names on their helmets or on their jerseys, right? They'll kneel, or they'll do the Black Power fist or whatever it is in these persons' names, right? Right. So they are bestowing upon them public recognition, public honor, in generally a positive light, right? And I do think that's a practice that does need to be criticized and called out, because while yes, you should be concerned about how a person, even a criminal, dies, because criminals have rights in this country, right? People don't always agree with it. Some people say the criminals have too many rights. I would agree in some instances, but criminals still have rights in this country, and one of the rights is to, not be injured and not be killed when you're brought into police custody, right? You're not supposed to die in police custody, ideally, right? So yes, people should certainly be concerned about how even a criminal is restrained and brought in, right? Because you can't go through the justice system, you can't go on trial or serve a prison sentence if you're dead, right? But still, when it comes to honoring a person, especially in this very public way where it's not just happening in a city or a state, it happens across the country, and especially with the world we live in, it happens across the world, right? I was watching a video recently, and there have been BLM protests in Japan. Japan, the Far East, or East Asia. And yet there are Black Lives Matter protests in a country where black people hardly exist, right? Like Japan is like literally like 98% Japanese people. There are very few people looking like me in Japan, right? You may have a few mixed people. You have people like pro wrestler Aja Kong, who's half Japanese, half black. But again, people who look like me are in short supply in Japan. Yet there have been BLM protests in Japan, which is amazing to me. But it just shows just how international even our national news here in America has become. And again, given all the protests and unfortunately the rioting and the looting and the burning down of cities and parts of cities and just the general unrest that our esteemed, oftentimes Democrat elected oppressors do nothing about because they want to stick it to Trump by making sure that the cities are uninhabitable and unsafe. So thanks, guys. Thanks, de Blasio. Thanks, Cuomo. Awesome. Lori Lightfoot, whatever the hell her name is, great job letting the city burn to the damn ground. But anyway, we're talking about esteeming honor onto people, right? Esteeming honor. Well, if we're going to esteem honor to people, I think we should know what honor is, how honor is defined, right? So, this thing working here, good. I gotta check at a time. So, when we're talking about honor, right, here's how Merriam-Webster Dictionary defines honor. And it has a lot of definitions, right? So, we have honor as a noun, and it says the definition of honor. And here are many definitions, right? But it says good name or public esteem, a showing of usually merited respect, privilege, a person of superior standing, now used especially as a title for a holder of high office, one whose worth brings respect or fame, the center point of the upper half of something. I don't know what the heck it is. An evidence or symbol of distinction, such as an exalted title or rank, a badge, decoration, a ceremonial rite or observance, an award in a contest or field of competition, a gesture of deference, such as to bow, right? And then there's honors, which is plural, right? An academic distinction conferred on a superior student, a course of study for superior students supplementing or replacing a regular course. Interestingly enough, I was an honor student in school for a brief time. But then you have other definitions such as chastity and purity, a keen sense of ethical conduct, integrity, right? One's word given as a guarantee of performance. Then you have social courtesies or civilities extended by a host. And then you have ace, king, queen, jack, or 10 in bridge, right? The privilege of playing first from a tee in golf. And then you have honor as a verb, right? And then it says, it's a transitive verb, and it says to regard or treat someone with admiration and respect, to regard or treat with honor, to give special recognition to confer honor on, to live up to or fulfill the terms of, right, such as to honor a commitment, to accept as payment, such as to, honor a credit card, to salute with a bow, in square dancing, right? So a lot of definitions and uses for the word honor, both as a noun and both as a verb. But I think the one thing that is obvious in all these different definitions and uses is that it's generally a positive thing, right? When you esteem somebody with honor, it is because of usually the good things, right, they have done in life, the exceptionally good things, right? It said a person of superior standing. was one of the definitions given, right, that I read off, right? So we usually want to honor an exceptionally good person, right? And you have, especially in sports, right? Football, and basketball, especially, that's the one I'm familiar with the most. They'll have the Black Lives Matter shirts. They'll kneel. They'll have shirts saying George Floyd or I can't breathe, right? And all of these things, and they'll do the Black Power fist and all that, right? So they want to keep these people's names not only in the public space, right, in the media, but they also want to esteem them with honor, right? Have the public remember them and exalt them, I would say, right? In a positive way. Well, I would imagine that if you want to do that, right, then you would have to look at not just how the person died, or in some cases was injured, right? But you would have to look at how the person lived. It is a person's accomplishments in life, what they did in their life, how they impacted their community, whether their community was their nation, their city, their state, their hometown, whether they impacted the world in some way, or whether their community was simply their friends and families and loved ones. How did they impact their community? What did they do in life that was so wonderful that they should be esteemed, honored, especially in a public space where you have celebrities and large media organizations keeping not just your name alive after your demise, right? But also basically trying to canonize you, right? Trying to turn you into a saint. In fact, there was an article I was reading recently from the BBC that talked about the steps to sainthood. Let me look that up 1 second. I gotta pause this. Okay, so I just found the article on how a person becomes a saint according to Catholic tradition. Now, I'm not going to be going every single point, but what I wanted to point out was two things in particular, right? So there's apparently a step where you have to become a servant of God, obviously. That's interestingly enough, it's step 2. The first step is to wait 5 years after the person died, usually, to look into whether to even start the process. And then step 2 is to become a servant of God, right? But it says here, under step 2, right, it says here that once the 5 years are up or a waiver is granted, the bishop of the diocese where the person died can open an investigation into the life, I want to emphasize this, the life of the individual, to see whether they lived their lives with sufficient holiness and virtue to be considered for sainthood, right? And then it says a little later, it says, evidence is gathered on the person's life and deeds, including witness testimonies, right? Okay, so again, we are focusing on what a person who has now passed away did during their life, getting an accounting of their life, witness accounts and testimonies of their life. Not just how they died, but how they lived. And then step 3, at least according to this article, again it says to show proof of a life of heroic virtue, right? And then it says here that the Congregation for the Causes of Saints scrutinizes the evidence of the candidate's holiness, work, and signs that people have been drawn to prayer through their example. If the congregation approves the case, it's passed on to the Pope, right? And then it says here, if the Pope decides that the person, I want to focus on this part, person lived a life of heroic virtue, then they can be called venerable, right? So even in those 2 steps, right, what the church, let's just say the church has to do in these 2 situations, right, going through these steps of a person becoming a saint, was to look at their life course, right, and to see whether or not they lived a life basically worth honoring, Now I know I used a religious example in that, you know, how the Catholic Church goes about uh, bringing a person to sainthood, but I think the process, even if you are not religious or not a Catholic, is the same, right? You should be looking, at least in my opinion, for whatever it's worth, we should be looking at a person's life course, the evidence that we have, and we have a lot of it on social media today, of a person's life course if we're going to be honoring them, right? If we're going to be esteeming them in the public eye, especially if we're going to be doing that, right? If we're going to be esteeming a person and their memory, right? Esteeming their life course, right? The heck? 1 second. If we're going to be esteeming their life, to call out the injustice regarding their death. I want to make that clear, right? Because many arguments are that, you know, the killing or the injury in the case of Jacob Blake is unjust, right? And a lot of people like to argue, well, it's unjust because the person's black, or it's unjust because of this or that, right? It's like, well, if you're going to argue that it's unjust, and yeah, in I would say even in many instances, yeah, what the police do at times can be considered excessive or unjust in one way or another. But if you're going to be esteeming them honor and elevating them in the eyes of the public, they need to have lived a life worth that. They need to have lived a life worth honor, especially if you're going to use their life to argue against the manner in which they died. So, let's look at a few people and see if they measure up to this definition of honor, both given by a dictionary and given by the Catholic Church. So let's see here, right? Let's look at Jacob Blake, who's the most, excuse me, who's the most recent one, right? So here's what it says on Wikipedia regarding his shooting and what led up to his shooting, right? It says here, on August 23rd, Kenosha police responded to a 911 call about a domestic incident at approximately 5:11 p.m. According to multiple official sources, the female caller, referred to Blake as her boyfriend, said he was not permitted to be on the premises and that he'd taken her car keys and was refusing to give them back. Officers were also informed by the dispatcher that there was a wanted alert for someone at the address, initiated by Police Code 10-99. Blake had a warrant, an arrest warrant, right, from July, based on charges of third-degree sexual assault. So that's pretty damn serious, right? Third-degree sexual assault. Trespassing, disorderly conduct in connection with domestic abuse. The woman who called 911 on August 23rd, the woman had called. Really, New York City? Can you stop with the noises for a dang minute? Anyway, it says here, let me try it again. The woman who called 911 on August 23rd to report that Blake had stolen her car keys was the same woman who had previously filed the criminal complaint alleging Blake had sexually assaulted her, right? Both Kenosha Police Chief Daniel Niskinis and the Kenosha Professional Police Association stated that the officers dispatched on August 23rd were aware of the pending warrant for Blake when they arrived on the scene, right? So, from what I can make sense of here, right, Blake's girlfriend, who apparently he committed or at least was charged for third-degree sexual assault. That's pretty damn serious, right? And trespassing and disorderly conduct in connection with domestic abuse, right? And she calls 911, right, to report that Jacob Blake stole her car keys, and she's the same woman who had previously filed the criminal complaint alleging that he sexually assaulted her, right? So if these claims in in her complaint are true, right? He wasn't, and he's not a good guy, right? Yet you have BLM saying, "We love you, Jacob Blake." It's like, um, if these charges against him are indeed true, then he's not a person worth loving. He's not a person worth honoring. You can be critical of the shooting all you want. I will admit, I'm critical of it. Every time I hear about a shooting, especially when it's someone getting shot in the back, I always flash back to the death of Latasha Harlins, right? For those who may not know her name or don't remember her, right? Her death happened around the time of the LA riots, right? She got into an altercation with a store owner. The store owner ultimately ended up pulling a gun on her, shot her in the back of the head, right? That happened about 2 weeks after the beating of Rodney King. So I'll admit, I'm not going to act as if I don't have a bias in these things. Whenever I hear about a person being shot in the back, I always sort of compare it to what happened to Latasha. So again, I'm not against being critical of how the police handled these situations. I think there is a fair point in place for criticism. But we're talking about honoring, honor, not just criticism of how they died, but honoring these people who get killed or hurt in these situations, and then of course their names are splashed across social media, especially by the media, right? We're talking about honoring them, right? Holding them in public esteem. I don't think a person who, if the charges against him are true, sexually assaulted his girlfriend, then came back to said girlfriend's home, is a man worth is a man worth of esteem. He's not a man, at least by what we know about him, assuming that it's true, he's not a man worthy of honor, right? Or if we look at the where is it? Where are we? 1 second. Oh, here we go. If we look at the background, right, of George Floyd, right, it's his death that has really kicked things off into what we're seeing today and have been dealing with for about almost 4 months now, right, about 3.5 months now, right. And here's the thing, even Snopes, and I don't trust Snopes worth a damn. I want to be clear. In my opinion, in many instances, Snopes is pure fake news, and they have an agenda just like everyone else does. But even Snopes had to admit and had to acknowledge that, and I'm reading from the Snopes article that they did on George Floyd's criminal record. Police arrested Floyd a total of 9 times, mostly on drug and theft charges. This is not an innocent guy. This isn't a person who was living his life in a exceptionally good and positive way, right? According to this, at least according to this screenshot that Snopes provides, right? George Floyd was arrested 9 times in between 1997 and 07, so for 10 years, right? 9 times within 10 years. And there was, some of the charges are for theft from a person, theft of, I don't know how much money, but it says between $50 to $500. There's failure to identify to a police officer. There's trespass. There's possession, and then of course there's the most serious one from '07, which was aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. Okay, aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. Right? Again, looking at his life, right? And I did a little more reading on him, and it seems like there was a period of time in his life when he tried to turn his life around, but it doesn't seem like that period in his life stuck. Unfortunately, right? But if we're going to be talking about a person's death, then the way that they also lived matters. And unfortunately for George Floyd, he spent at least 10 years of his life committing crimes, right? Committing crimes in relation to drugs and theft, right? He's not a man, given again, using the standards set by the Catholic Church, right? Witness accounts, right? He held a gun to a woman's stomach, right? That's a witness account. He didn't live his life in an honorable manner, yet you have celebrities and social media sites and people like LeBron James wanting to basically canonize him and others, right? And it's like, look, as I've said several times, you want to be critical of how the police dealt with these situations, have at it. I think it's justified because the police are, whatever's left of them, are supposed to protect us. And they're supposed to bring in criminals, ideally without incident and without injury and certainly without death. So you want to question when all of that goes to hell and everything goes wrong? Question it all the livelong day. I have no problem with that when that is done with objectivity and nuance and is not done to encourage the unrest that we see in the world and in America today. So again, you want to be critical, have at it. But when we're talking about esteeming people like George, like Jacob, and many others, honor. We need to look at their life and see if they are worthy of honor. And at least these two men were not. They did not lead honorable lives. And it doesn't seem like either one of them made changes to their lives that stuck. Because people do turn around. People can do some really dangerous stuff, really cruel stuff in their youth, and then they turn around in life. That doesn't seem to be what happened in their two individual cases, at least from the information I found. Again, even Snopes has to admit that George Floyd had a pretty bad criminal history, right? Like, let me ask you guys this, right? What if you had, let me put it to you like this, right? Suicide is a huge problem in the world, right? I think we can all acknowledge that suicide is a huge worldwide problem, right? I think we can all agree with that. But I don't think anybody, unless they are insane in some fashion, would say that honoring or remembering, say, I don't know, Adolf Hitler, for example, is a good way to bring attention to the issue of suicide, right? It wouldn't be a good way to bring attention to the issue of suicide to honor a man who led his country into the darkest period of their modern history, tried to take over Europe, and got millions of people killed because of their religious background, right? We don't judge Hitler just for how he died, ultimately taking his own life. We judge Hitler for what he did while he was alive. What he did was absolutely awful. And he's not a man deserving of honor, right? He's a man deserving of the very opposite. He deserves to be vilified because he was a villain of the highest order. And no sane person in their right mind would say, hey, let's take April 30th and make it National Suicide Day just because that was the day Hitler took his own life. No sane person would do that because of the life Hitler lived. So if you're going to make judgments or esteem people because of the way they died, then make sure their life is something worth esteeming. If there's any message that I'm trying to get across in this overly long video, because when have I ever made short videos? It's that if you're going to memorialize someone because of how they died, then make sure that their life, that the life they lived, that the impact they had on other people is worth it. If you're going to try to turn someone into a saint, either in the religious sense or in the non-religious sense, make sure they actually led a saint-like life, a good life, one where they helped people, one where they were contributing and were a benefit to their community, not one where they were terrorizing their girlfriends and holding guns to people's stomachs and arrested 9 times in a 10-year span. Just make sure that the person you're esteeming, especially if they're dead, is worth esteeming. That's pretty much it. That's the way I feel about it, right? Players putting people's names, and again, it's like, I think there was one story I heard recently about a player wanting to honor David Dorn, so whoever that player was, thank you. But to other players who want to esteem George Floyd and Jacob Blake and other types of people, let me just ask you this. If you had a daughter, or if you do have a daughter, would you want her involved with Jacob Blake or George Floyd? Would you want that man in your life, in your daughter's life? Would you want that man to be your son-in-law? Would you want that man to be the father of her children? If not, then maybe he's not worth esteeming in the public eye. If he's not good enough for your daughter, if he's too dangerous and too violent for your daughter, maybe he's too dangerous to be canonizing and achieving secular sainthood, in the greater public space. Just saying. But anyway, that's the video. Please let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.